So when we do mental health first aid, this is Algie, and he's the mascot for mental health first aid because mental health first aid started in Australia. So this is Algie, and Algie is an acronym for the Mental Health First Aid Action Plan. So the A in Algie stands for assessing for risk of suicide or harm. So that's the first step you always take when you're dealing with somebody who's been through a traumatic event or they seem depressed or anxious, is you assess for the risk of suicide or harm. The L stands for listening non-judgmentally. And in mental health first aid, we get really down into what does that actually mean to listen non-judgmentally. G is giving reassurance and information, just reassuring the person, I'm there for you, there's help, there's resources. Then we have the first E, which is encouraging appropriate professional help. And then the second E is encouraging self-help and other support strategies. So showing them how can they support themselves after the crisis is over. So the most common crises to assess for with depressive and anxiety symptoms are suicidal thoughts and behaviors and non-suicidal self-injury. When doing a suicide risk assessment, we see gender plays a role. Males die by suicide more often than women, but women attempt more. Why do you think that is, that men actually complete suicide or die by suicide more often than women do?
You should all know this.
Their methods are usually more
more lethal methods, typically. But that's changing. You know, women do take guns and try to hang themselves or do hang themselves.
So, I see where women may
take pill overdose, cut their wrists,
and that gives people more
time
first
to
responders to do something. I see where a gun's pretty absolute. What's plain up.
Yes.
Yeah, I see.
Yes. Yeah. So women, I think, attempt 3 or 4 times more often than men do, but men actually complete suicide. And we like to use, we use the word complete suicide rather than commit suicide, because committing suicide makes it sound like a crime, and it's not. And we don't like to say a successful suicide, so we say they died by suicide or they completed suicide. Language is very important. We see age also plays a role. We see young adults, and we also see the elderly. People living with chronic physical illnesses, especially illnesses that are terminal or associated with a lot of pain. Mental illness definitely plays a factor. The use of alcohol or other substances, because it decreases inhibitions and makes the person more likely to follow through with the suicide. Someone that's living with less social support is more at risk. And someone who's had a previous attempt and an organized plan. Now, 2 of these risk factors are really, they're all red flags, but 2 of them are extreme red flags. What do you think those 2 are?
the last 2.
Yes, the last 2. So previous attempt, they've tried before, this time they're going to make sure they get it right. And then organized plan. But just because somebody says they don't have a plan doesn't mean we don't take it serious and we don't get them help. All right, so before I show the slide, you tell me, what are some warning signs of suicide? That someone's thinking about suicide.
Hopelessness, giving stuff away.
Okay.
I knew Chandra had a couple from the Air Force training.
Yearly. Green dot.
What else? What are some other warning signs of suicide?
Happier.
I was gonna say really.
Yes. So change in mood. And not necessarily for the worse. It seems like they're, and we'll talk about that briefly. All right. So someone making threats to hurt or kill oneself, even if they've done it 50 times before, we take it serious every time because you don't know when that is going to be, the time that they do. Seeking access to means. They're stockpiling their medications, they're trying to, purchase a gun. talking, writing, we see this especially, today, especially amongst adolescents, talking, writing, or posting on social media about death, dying, or suicide. Feeling hopeless, someone mentioned. Feeling worthless, or just feeling like, what's my purpose? Why am I here? Acting recklessly or engaging in risky activities, particularly for males, just kind of driving down the freeway 110 miles an hour and don't really care what happens. Feeling trapped in a situation. Increasing alcohol or drug use. Withdrawing or isolating from family, friends, and or society. Demonstrating rage and anger or seeking revenge. Appearing agitated. And then, as Allison mentioned in the back, having a dramatic change in mood. So they've been crying and isolating and depressed, and then all of a sudden they have a change in mood and they seem like they're back to themselves and they're smiling and they're hanging out with you. Huge red flag. Because why is that, Allison?
They've made the decision.
They've made the decision. They know when they're going to kill themselves, how they're going to kill themselves. They know the pain is going to end. So, huge red flag. In fact, most suicides actually happen within a 3-month period of improvement in mood. So we need to be vigilant.
What happens, is there, we had a guy, had terminal cancer at work, and he died in his bathroom. I suspect that he was pretty terminal, I guess it came out down to, but I suspect I have no real proof, but just some of the things he may have decided to commit suicide, but it was, the only thing I knew he was getting worse physically. Beyond that, no mood swings, no nothing, just, it just seemed like he was just going along with what his doctor, and
Sure.
and I just, part of me thought, I wonder, but it's just like I saw nothing there.
And sometimes it is possible for somebody not to show signs. Typically they will. If we're looking and listening, we'll see something, but there are times, and the other thing to remember is that we can be as vigilant as possible and people are still going to die by suicide.
There's a lot of people out there who have been through training on suicide awareness, so they know how to hide the signs as well.
Sure. Yeah. So it's possible. It is possible for somebody, to take their life, and everybody's like, I didn't see it. So, and that's, horrible. All right. So, questions to ask. If we have a thought that they might be thinking about suicide, we need to ask them directly. And there's a couple ways to do that. We can ask, are you having thoughts of suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Now, why don't we want to say, are you thinking about hurting yourself?
Because hurting yourself is much less.
It's like downplaying.
It's downplaying.
Yes, and not only that, say Mandy asked me if I was thinking about hurting myself, I could say no, because I'm thinking about killing myself. Then I'd be truthful.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's important to ask them to say the words suicide, killing yourself. And it's not comfortable, not a fun thing to do, but it's very necessary that we, ask them. And it's a myth that you're going to put the idea in their head. People will usually feel a little bit of relief, like, oh, somebody's asking, I can talk about it. So, right. So if they say yes to either of those questions, then you're going to ask if they have a plan. And you're going to ask specifics. Have you decided how you're going to kill yourself? Have you decided when you would do it? Have you collected the things you need to carry out your plan? And the higher the level of planning, the higher the risk. However, just because there is no plan doesn't mean that the risk isn't there and that we don't need to get professional help. and get them assessed appropriately. Has anybody ever had to ask these questions? Yeah. Okay. Most people. Has anybody never had to ask that question yet? Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My first was a hotline caller, so.
Actually, it's sister back east. I kind of just some stuff. I said, "Are you thinking about?" Well, she suffers from depression and other issues. We didn't have best of childhood, but it's like, you know, and she's, yeah, you know, she kind of half brought up and said, "Really?" And she says several times, you know, I'm like, "Oh wow."
Sure. Most people will feel relieved if you ask these questions.
Yeah.
They'll feel relieved, you know, somebody actually wants to know and I can talk about it. You know, most people they want to. They don't know how to talk about it or who to talk about it with, but most people will be relieved if somebody will ask them and be willing to listen.
Part of it is, you know, with her, I didn't know what to say back. You know, it's like, you know, it's kind of like,
Especially when it's somebody that's close to you, right?
well, and also it tends to. She's also, I think, a little bit on the bipolar side, and it's like I didn't want to trigger that. You know, but it's like, okay, what do I say here? You know.
Mm-hmm. The other thing, well, actually, we're gonna get into that shortly, so I'll hold that off for a minute. So how do we talk to somebody who's suicidal? We want to let them know I'm concerned, I'm willing to help, I'm here for you. We want to discuss our observations of the person. You know, I notice you haven't been going out with us after work. You know, you've been missing work a lot. You've been calling in. You just don't seem yourself. Again, ask the question without dread. Are you thinking about suicide? Are you having thoughts about killing yourself? We don't want to express any negative judgments. We can think them, but don't say them out loud. Keep those to yourself. We want to appear confident because that can be reassuring to the person. And a couple other risks we want to check for. Have they been using alcohol or other drugs? Because again, that reduces inhibitions. And has he or she made a suicide attempt in the past? Have they, quote unquote, practiced? They know why it didn't happen last time, and they're going to make sure it happens this time. Keeping the person safe. Provide a safety contact number. Okay. A hotline. Maybe ask them, you know, who's a safe person? Who do they trust? Help them identify past supports, you know, groups, therapists, friends, family, clergy. Try to involve them in the decision making. You know, we need to get some help. Here's a couple options, you know, and help them to feel a little bit of control. If they have a weapon or they're behaving aggressively, you're going to need to call law enforcement. And if you do need to call law enforcement, you want to make sure you give that 911 operator as much detail as possible. I believe they're suicidal, you know, and they're, you know, and don't try to label them. They're acting psychotic or they're being, you know, bipolar or whatnot. Describe their behaviors and their actions and their thought process. Because most law enforcement, they've been trained in crisis intervention training, and hopefully they'll bring in some officers that can deal with a mental health crisis. Things we don't want to do. We never want to leave an actively suicidal person alone, and we never want to use guilt or threats to try to prevent suicide. You're going to go to hell, you know, you're going to ruin everybody's lives if you die by suicide. Again, keep those thoughts to yourself. Not helpful. And we never agree to keep suicide or a plan a secret. It's better to have somebody angry and alive than to have them die by suicide. So any questions on suicide, keeping the person safe, talking to someone who's suicidal? All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about how we listen. Yes?
How do you feel about contracts or agreements, like to get off the hotline? If you've been talking to them for 30 minutes and you believe you've talked them down, we talked about making an agreement with them to call back?